It's bottom paint season for a lot of us, and before I decide which paint to buy this year, I checked over the Practical Sailor archive for some help. I found this article from last year, link in the description, where Daryl tested 6 different paints to see which one worked best. In this test, we see hard paints and ablative paints. Hard paints are typically faster through the water. The racers like those ones. They last longer, but you have to keep them clean. Ablative paints, on the other hand, by design, fall off over time. That's their job. As growth builds up, the paint falls off the boat with the growth, and then you can add more ablative paint. Here's what Daryl had to say. We applied 6 different anti-fouling paints to our test boat, which is a Corsair F24 trimaran. The center hull and the 2 amas were divided up. We applied 2 coats to all areas, with an extra coat in the high wear areas, so the bow and the sides. We put 3 coats on the centerboard and a single coat in the centerboard case. We sailed the boat about 2 to 3 times a month for 4 to 8 hours each time, typically at speeds of 6 to 10 knots, but occasionally as fast as 15 knots on windy days. These boats are really fast. We inspected the boat in the water every 6 months. We gave it a light cleaning after about 14 months and a more energetic scrub while snorkeling at 20 months. The haul out 4 months later offered a closer look at the results. At 20 months before cleaning, we went for a vigorous half-day sail across the Chesapeake Bay and back. This was to remove any lightly adhered soft growth. The first paint, Pettit Trinidad Pro. A lot of people use this one. This is a hard paint. This was applied to the bow and the front third of the main hull. Trinidad Pro was covered in a thin, soft growth with just a few immature barnacles. All fouling could be wiped off with a glove. That sounds really nice. There was no need for scraping. Not bad for 20 months. The next paint was Pettit Odyssey Triton. This is an ablative paint. Pettit's most expensive ablative paint. At 20 months on the boat, it was free of any significant fouling. It was applied to the centerboard, which is retracted when the boat is stationary in its slip. This can reduce fouling by limiting exposure to sunlight and oxygen, and perhaps concentrating anti-fouling agents in a confined space. However, paint at the centerboard can wear away faster, especially at the leading edge. The next paint was TotalBoat Krypton. This is also an ablative paint. Applied near the middle of the main hull, this was a top performer on this boat, with only traces of thin, soft growth and a few barnacles. This paint also performed the best at the waterline, where fouling is usually the most extensive. A gentle wipe with an extremely worn-out red Starbright pad made this paint bright green again. Despite lacking copper and having a relatively small amount of zinc biocide, this paint performed exceptionally well. The next paint was Interlux Micron CSC, pretty popular, applied to the aft third of the main hull. The ablative paint Micron CSC lost its effectiveness at 24 months. This is typical for this paint, which we've used before in this location. In several places, there was a very heavy growth on this paint, including large patches of solid barnacle growth that required vigorous scraping. About half of the test area showed heavy soft growth, creating 3/4 inch thick carpet of growth. Some areas were lighter and could be wiped off. The next paint was from ePaint, ZO. The ZO shows out of stock now at the manufacturer's website, but they still have a lot of different paints available. ZO was applied to the starboard ama, and the copper-free ZO had clearly lost its anti-fouling properties after the first year. In some areas, the growth was 1.25 inches thick. The next one's from ePaint, called EcoMinder. Painted on the port ama, the metal-free EcoMinder paint had lost its anti-fouling properties in the first year as well. It protected a little better than the ePaint ZO. There were more soft growth, but less hard growth. The paint started peeling along the waterline after about 6 months. They hauled the test boat out again at 24 months, and here's what they found. Pettit Trinidad Pro, the popular one, Trinidad Pro showed only a little growth near the waterline at 24 months. Power washing did not damage the durable hard paint, proving its scrub-resistant reputation. A quick wipe with that Starbright pad, using the hard edge to pop off a few barnacles, would have cleaned the entire hull. Trinidad hard paints all performed predictably well, with the advantage of easy scrubbing, although they are probably the best paints suited for boats that are either sailed frequently or vigorously, raced, or serviced by a diver regularly. Pettit Odyssey Triton that we applied to the centerboard, this ablative paint remained very clean with just a few small barnacles. TotalBoat Krypton performance dropped sharply on the panel testing after 20 months, but it remained the #2 performer on the boat. It seemed a little slicker than the other ablatives, perhaps allowing it to shed more growth while you're underway, and it seemed to be of intermediate hardness, tolerating cleaning a little bit better than the other ablatives. Like Trinidad Pro, we could have wiped away the growth with a Starbright pad. An ablative won't hold up to regular, vigorous cleaning as well as hard paint will, but it also won't build up over time. Interlux Micron CSE was no longer effective at all against barnacles after about 20 months. Soft growth was also pretty widespread. This mirrors our prior on-boat experience with this paint in this area. One popular feature of this paint, though, and one we've confirmed previously on our test of boats, is that it will retain its effectiveness through a winter haul-out, unlike hard paints, which need to be reactivated by sanding before you put the boat back in. ePaint ZO, as mentioned, lost its anti-fouling properties at the 1-year mark. The adhesion problems got worse through year 2. ePaint EcoMinder, that anti-fouling paint failed earlier in the cycle too at about the 1-year mark. After 2 years, the adhesion problems were severe, with about 20% of the paint coming off during power washing. Complete removal required for repainting was not all that difficult because the adhesion was so poor. Our conclusion then, the best ablatives edged out the best hard paints in panel testing, except for the lone hard paint that we tested on the boat topped with real-world experience. If we weren't recoating, we would anticipate harder paints to pull ahead in the next year, as more scrubbing would be necessary to keep them clean. But with our 2-year haul-out regimen that we're going to do anyway, the advantage of having an ablative paint was pretty clear in our tests. By the time we scrubbed, power washed, and lightly sanded the ablative coatings, only about 30% of the original paints remained, and the surface was ready for recoating. If we followed that 2-year service plan with a hard paint, we'd have a reckoning after about 5 to 7 haul-outs. We'd need to remove all the paint. With the test over, we were looking forward to having a hull with just one paint on it. With several good options in the test field, this wasn't an easy choice. We like how the Trinidad hard paint stood up to the scrubbing. The reduced buildup in the Odyssey ablative paints is a bonus, and the Trinidad was virtually spotless. In the end, we decided to paint the Chesapeake Bay boat with TotalBoat Krypton. During most of the 2-year test, this was the best overall performer, and it had a harder job than the Pettit Triton, which saw less exposure in the centerboard trunk. I found TotalBoat Krypton for $2.29 a gallon, and if it worked on the Chesapeake Trimaran, it'll work just fine for me on the Great Lakes, and it comes in blue. Which bottom paint do you use? Share in the comments, because a lot of people are making this decision right now, and our experience can really help.